Good morning. Thank you.
Good morning.
Everybody take a deep breath with me. Breathe it in, breathe it out. When I'm not writing content, I teach yoga. So how did I get here today? This content strategist walks into an IA event. I am really cheesy with the jokes. My son will tell you. Mom jokes all day long. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about the intersection of content strategy and information architecture. It's called the experience-making magic of tidying stuff. And if that sounds familiar, it's because I was inspired by Marie Kondo. So we're going to run through a little bit about the intersection of information architecture and content strategy, how they've evolved kind of separately but also together over time, and how they've become increasingly complementary to each other. I want to show how together they contribute to creating and making sense of information spaces. And I kind of want to show you how the magic happens when they come together on a little mini use case that I have from a past client website. So a little bit about me. I've worn a lot of content hats and a few non-content hats. I've been all over the map here. I was a reporter for a while, but my first job was as a library page, so shout out to libraries. It was a long time ago. But I have a passion for all things written. My challenge for today was not standing here talking to you, it was how to reduce the number of words on the slide. So I promise you I will not read slides to you. But I've worked in a lot of highly regulated spaces, and that presents challenges in and of itself. And I've done a lot of healthcare work. Right now I am a consultant, enterprise not an information architect, enterprise content strategist with Anthem. So, and I work specifically right now on Medicare and Medicaid, so you can imagine the amount of interaction that we have with like state and federal agencies and that kind of thing just to get content on a site. So it has its challenges. So I want to talk about, because books, right? I want to talk about the evolution of IA in books, because I am a fan of books. And of course Lynn talked about the Polar Bear book, and I know that's the first edition. My first introduction to information architecture was actually the book in the middle. It was a really heady kind of like way that I found out the same as Lynn. I was like, that's what I want to be when I grow up. Didn't end up being an IA, but close enough. There's some overlap. And then of course, how to make sense of any mess kind of helped me to start to understand how to work side by side with the IAs that I've had a chance to partner with on various projects that I've worked on. I tend to sit in UX. How many people here have worked with, heard of content strategy, or worked with a content strategist? How many people think of content strategy and you think of copywriting? You would not be wrong, there's no wrong answer. I see you back there.
So much more than copywriting.
How many think of content strategy and you think, oh, those are the people that load the content in the CMS? And then how many think, oh, there's somebody that sits there and thinks about content structure and hierarchy and words on labels and buttons and things like that. That's kind of where I live in the UX space. I'm usually going to the hip with the UX designer in my role. But anyway, as I was trying to transition from a career in print journalism into this thing called the internet, because I've been around for a while, I tried to figure out what made me relevant. And so I found that book and I started thinking, how do I get in on this? Like, how can I do this architecture thing? The metaphor of architecture made sense to me. It's like, how do you organize things? How do you make sense of things? I would later come to understand that as a content strategist as content hierarchy, as I mentioned a few minutes ago. And so these volumes started to speak to me as I was trying to transition from the print world into online. Then came along the content strategy books. So somewhere around in 2009, the first edition of the Little Red Book came out, and that blew my mind. My first book was actually the one in the middle, the Web Content Strategist Bible. What I like to say about how that book kind of changed the way I thought about content strategy was that it helped me to structure a content strategy practice and learn what deliverables would be relevant, whether it was an internal client or if I was working at an agency, like what deliverables would I need to deliver or to give to a client to help them understand what it is that I did, right? And why they needed content strategy. And again, overlapping with IA and working with IA in that process. When I read the Little Red Book though, mind blown, that helped me to figure out how to scale a content strategy practice, right? So still the basic structure and framework for content strategy. Speaking of structure, content governance, maintenance, optimization, and those types of things, but also how do you scale that in a large organization like Kaiser Permanente or Anthem? And then the book on the end, which is like it's an airplane ride read, by Erin Kisane, that helped me to articulate to my clients, even though they knew they needed content strategy, they were like, what is it really? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna do our social media? Are you gonna do this? Are you gonna do that? No, I'm not gonna do those things, but here's how we're gonna help you. So that helped me to be able to articulate, what it is that we bring to the table with content strategy. And then along in 2014, the same year that Abby wrote her book, here's Marie Kondo, serving up this promise of life-changing magic. I ended up with a complex, because I was like, I don't know what sparks joy. All the things spark joy. I have no idea. But I got a little salty because I like books. And she said, you can only keep 30. And I'm like, no, that's not gonna work for me. Ask my son how many stacks of books we have. There's a lot of them. But I was drawn to the concept of tidying up. Not even so much from the standpoint of my home, which could probably use a bit of decluttering, but it was how to approach the art and science of making sense of stuff, right? And starting to think, what does that have to do with content strategy? What does that have to do with information architecture? So that was the kind of the inspiration for my talk today. So before we go any further, let's talk about some definitions and some differentiation. So, I'm sure a lot of you in here already know what information architecture is, but I have to share. I did my homework. We talk about structural design of shared information. We talk about organization, labeling, is how we arrange the parts of something to make it understandable. Now, I'm going to admit something to you in this very public space. When I first started out, I thought information and content were one and the same. Abby helped me understand that that was not true. Information is not the same as content. All right, that got me straight. But it's just like, okay, well, then what is it? But as I said, talks about structuring information in a way that is similar to how content strategy talks about structured content, using things like content models and content components and reusable content components that help to create replicable processes when we're actually publishing content. So content that's structured in a way that is agnostic of whatever device that you're consuming it on, whether it's a tablet, phone, whatever it is. And as I started to think about how both disciplines start to approach the idea of content and information, it started to make sense to me that I was actually incorporating IA with some of my work, especially since, as someone pointed out earlier, we don't always have the luxury of having an IA that's dedicated on a project or within a company. So likewise, as we looked at what information and information architecture is, let's look at content strategy for a moment. So it's any text, image, video, decoration, and words on the page as well. People tend to think of content and content strategy as being only tied to the words on the page, but it's so much more than that. And there's some overlaps and similarities, again, with IA. When we talk about defining things like navigational elements, and we talk about things like label nomenclature, and how we support the structure that's created by IA with the type of content experiences that someone needs for wayfinding and making journeys that are useful and usable. So a little bit, going back to the KonMari method for information spaces. So when I came up with the title for the talk, which I had to do before I actually created the talk, which was really a challenge for me. It's like, I usually create the slides first and then the title kind of emerges, and it didn't happen this time. So, but again, I saw those things as content strategy and information architecture as being similar in creating, making sense of spaces, right? So I found this quote when I went back to Marie Kondo's books, and I said, if I substitute the words, what did I say, less content, right, instead of fewer books. So I've noticed that having less content actually increases the impact of information I read. I recognize necessary information much more easily. Like, okay, that makes sense to me. So to say it in a different way, if we agree that content contained in information spaces is meant to be recognized, interacted with, and consumed, then what IA and content strategy have in common is a desire to improve wayfinding and navigation in those spaces to help users complete a task or a transaction. And that's where I see that there's a comfortable, lovely little relationship between the two disciplines. So let's take a look at what happens when we put this theory in practice, right? So first of all, we start with why. And we start with why in both content strategy and information architecture. So I love Abby Covert's questions. These are things that I ask. Why does this work need to be done? Why are we making changes? These are things that I ask when I do a qualitative audit of content on a site. Same questions. Why should people care? Why should the stakeholders invest money in hiring a content strategist to go through line by line and page by page and read their content and figure out whether it's useful, if it's relevant, or if it should be tossed, or whatever? Why hasn't this been tackled correctly in the past? Maybe because there were some resource constraints. Maybe because there was no content strategy or information architecture to address whatever issues we might find. And why will it be different this time? And that's where content strategy can come along once the IA has been kind of established and begin to go through the process of the content lifecycle and make sure that things stay relevant and that your content, if it's not evergreen, that it's always changing and meeting the needs of the user. And of course, if we want to clean our house, it's like, why can't I keep my house in order? It's like, and why should I? Because when I come there, people come over and I go, oh my goodness, what happened here? And then my favorite question, why does my content still suck? Right? So that's, I like to call that the behind the scenes question. When I'm working with a client, I never ask that question out loud, but I have two versions of a content audit. So I have my notes that are like my secret notes that I share with my colleagues. Like, did you read this? This is crazy. This is from, I don't know, 1998. It's 2020. Why is it still on the site? Things like that. And I just found something on the site the other day that's from 1998. So it happens. It's like, why is this here? Vintage. Exactly. It's vintage content, right? It's in the archives. So the why gets to the heart of the matter, right? Why are people coming to a website? Why are people using a mobile app? Why? And what is it that they want to get from that? So we've shared a few working definitions of IA and content strategy. We've talked about how they're a little different. We've talked about what they have in common. into making sense of information spaces. And we've also talked about what it means to start with why. So now, I apologize in advance for what you're about to see. Head up. This was Washington Gas, the utility company in Washington, D.C. That was their homepage in 2014, not 1998. And there's a lot going on here. Why Virginia rebates and it's Washington? And that's like one of the things that I asked when I first saw this site. What they were trying to do was separate the utility site where you go pay your bills and read about rates and that kind of thing. They wanted to create a site that was pushing a natural gas lifestyle. This is because in the DC area, a lot of homes in particular were equipped for electric appliances and different things like that, and they wanted people to start looking at converting into natural gas, using natural gas for their homes. It's an expensive process, and so you kind of sell this lifestyle, right? And let's face it, I don't go to my utility company website and go, oh, look, SDG&E's got this great, stove, or I don't know. I just go pay the bill and I'm done, in and out. But they wanted to be able to speak to a variety of users. So we had homeowners, we had commercial clients, we had builders and contractors. They all needed to get something from this natural gas lifestyle site, right? So we've got, I would say, 3 types of personas that we needed to kind of speak to. It was a big deal to the stakeholders to be able to sell this lifestyle, and it wasn't happening with this website. So, I'm not gonna read all the bullets, but as I said, they wanted to really create clear pathways to relevant information for the different persona types that I talked about, right? So what we did was, we kind of started with some interviews, stakeholder interviews, to figure out what business needs were and business goals were, and then we talked to different user types to figure out what the user needs were, right? How do you use the site now? Are you interested in converting? So on and so forth. I don't remember how the recruiting was done, but we got a representative number of people from each persona type that we wanted to talk about. Instead of starting then with, we had existing content that needed to be updated. But what we did was we started with the IA. And so an IA and the user experience designer got in the room and we created mega menus. Ta-da! This was 2015 now. So maybe it's still a little dated, but what we did was we looked at what were the user types, again, that we needed to speak to. So, and then what is it that we were trying to help them do? So, I'll show you the resulting homepage that's living underneath there in a moment. But we wanted to show people what it's like to have a natural gas lifestyle. I giggled the first time I heard it. I'm like, come on, really? But I got it after I talked to the stakeholders. I'm like, okay, I get what you mean. So what is it like with living with natural gas? And yes, we did joke like 12-year-olds with that one, but it was a subtitle that resonated, so we used it. We wanted to talk about things like disconnecting service and cost savings. Cost savings was big. Rebates were big. Different things like that. Of course, we had data that helped us to understand what we should have front and center for people to be able to find. Also, of course, we had our wayfinding up at the top because this experience became separate from the bill paying and the day-to-day that people would go to Washington Gas for. We also had a similar mega menu for business owners. We had a fight about for your business because internally the marketing team talked about our commercial customers. It has to say commercial. It's like, but that's not how they talk about it. They're business owners. They're not. I'm a commercial customer. It's like, no, this is what resonates. And we had our contractors and our builders. And if you're wondering about that, it's like contractors were I think they had they had to go through an approval process to be certified to install natural gas appliances in homes. And then the builders were like, if they were building a structure like this, for example, they had to have access to information as well about how to either convert to natural gas or how to, if you're building a new structure. They needed information, whatever it was on the site. I can't remember now, but yeah. There was like meter designs and all kinds of things. Anyway, what we ended up doing, as I said, we organized the content for the distinct user groups. We tried to maintain a clean, uncluttered look and feel. And then we had the utility nav for bill paying and different things like that. And what the homepage ended up looking like was this. We wanted to, again, kind of create like a magazine site look and feel. I don't have any shots of some of the internal pages anymore because I don't know what happened to them. But we had pages that had like different products that you could buy for your home that were natural gas, different types of stuff. They didn't sell them, but they would link you out to places where you could get them. They had lovely photos of like outdoor natural gas fireplaces and different things like that, really selling the lifestyle. The best part about it was once we launched the site, in 2015 we won an Addy Award for the site redesign. So in the time that I have left, I want to say that it's hard to talk about IA and content strategy without good old Venn diagram. I like this one though, it's from digital.gov, because it doesn't attempt to confine tasks and deliverables from one discipline to another. It's kind of cyclical, it goes back and forth, at least in the projects that I've worked on, where I'll consult with an IA or they may consult with me and we'll pull in our UX designer and try to make sense of things, right? I've said that a lot, but that really is what it boils down to. It's making sense of those spaces that people are in and they want to go and they want to be able to find what they need to find. They don't want their time wasted, so that's what we're there to do. The areas of responsibility, differentiation, and overlap might change from team to team. So getting to the question that was asked earlier, what's most important though is to note that you need both disciplines to be able to create the best possible experience for users. So in doing my research for this talk, I came across the perfect podcast. It was Christina Halverson interviewing Andy Gilbert.
Oh my.
And I know, right? I geeked out, I really did. And I love the way Abby talks about information architecture being the definition of structure and how the pieces are going to be arranged, and then how content strategy helps to make sure that that structure comes to life, right? We need each other. We need content strategy, we need information architecture, we need all of these things to create spaces that people feel welcomed, that are accessible, that are diverse and inclusive. Just like Lynn said earlier, we are the ones that are doing this work, that are creating these spaces and making the internet, web apps, whatever it is, even physical spaces, places where people feel welcome and where they can achieve what it is that they want to achieve. Thank you. Questions?
I just want to know if her deck's available, your slides are available.
I recorded them, and I think they're going to be up. Yep, they're going to be on the website. They will be available. You're welcome.
So hi, I'm Paul.
Hi, Paul.
You said something really interesting about the Washington Gas site. You said all the internal pages, we kind of don't know what happened to them, and it sparked something in my brain because I'm sure with your team you created a solid strategy going forward.
Yep.
But how or what methods do you use to make sure that strategy kind of makes its way downstream or has like staying power over time?
I'm glad you asked that question. So first, the reason why I couldn't get my hands on images of the internal pages because I went back. This was like I said, like 5 years ago. And they've changed the sites again, so you know how that happens. And I went to the old agency, I was like, yes, no, okay. So I just had these. But what we did was, this was one of the first times I did this. There was an internal marketing team that was responsible for working with us as an agency, but then they were going to be the ones that were going to carry forth this whole content strategy and everything we put together. I actually put together a content strategy style guide for them. And I touched on, I don't want to say little things, but I touched on AP style versus any other type of Chicago, whatever. So, you know, talking about voice, tone, those kinds of things. Talked about how to staff up so that they could continue to maintain the core content strategy that we had created for them. So we got deep in the weeds in some of the vocabulary and nomenclature and that kind of thing, but also a practical guide to how much staff you're going to need to maintain this. How often should you inventory, do a sample inventory and audit of your content, so you don't have things from 1998 that are still on your site, unless they absolutely have to be. So we gave them a nice little, I think it was probably, maybe 50 pages. But I mean, it was very concise, bulleted, and then of course they could, you know, ask us questions or whatever while we had us on retainer. But that's usually how we do it. We create a style guide, and that happens also in large organizations like Anthem and Kaiser, where we'll have there'll be design standards, but there's also content standards, and we try to govern accordingly. Good question, thanks. Anybody else? I think right here. Oh, there's one in the back, and we'll get to you.
Sorry.
No worries.
Hi, I'm Grace.
Hi, Grace.
How do you, so would you consider content separate from design, or is it the same?
There's a whole discipline now called content design, and it kind of incorporates UI, UX writing, microcopy, transactional copy, that kind of thing. I see it as part of, right? I mean, there's always going to be, I feel like, you know, back in the days of print journalism, it was like advertising versus editorial, you know, kind of button heads. We don't butt heads with design so much that we advocate for a space at the table at the kickoff early on. So we're not making this beautiful design that's this big and you've got this much content that needs to fit in it. Content should be first, especially in the highly regulated spaces, because there's stuff that you absolutely have to have on the site. And it can't just be in the footer this big. It's got to be, you know, we have some specifications for government content that has to, they specify the font size, right? So I think it's a part of the process. I think content is really part of the overall design of the site, and it's part of the overall design process, which is why my job as a content strategist, I call myself a UX-driven content strategist to kind of differentiate from other, you know, folks in the industry, because I am seated at that table with the design team when we get started. Right here, we had a question. Here comes the microphone.
Thank you. My name is Jong Ho. I'm UX designer.
Yes.
And I was talking with Chris Chandler early in the morning about my deep interest into strategy as a UX designer.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, just like you said, you know, the big boys table. So I'm just, you know, whenever I go to work for companies, I'm just a UX designer, but I am really into UX strategy, and also I feel like I've been practicing it, but for the time being, I just don't know how to show it to prove. And then also some companies, like if I actually apply for content strategists, but you have never been one, you're just a UX designer. So how can I actually, if you have a tip for leaping from, you know, UX designer to UX designer with the strategy?
With content strategy?
Yeah.
I mean, another good question. I mean, it's really hard to show content strategy unless you have slides that from, old things that you've done. It's a challenge for me when I try to create, like people say, well, we need to see your portfolio. I'm like, okay. It's not words on the page though. It's like, well, what is content strategy? But when I am able to show how maybe we approached, a content-heavy page or, I don't know, site where, like Washington Gas, where we could demonstrate visually what we did and tell the story, right? So you can show the visuals all day long. You got to be able to speak to how you maybe consulted with the content people, brought them into the UX process, right, early on, and how you were able to problem solve. Say you had this much content and you needed to confine it to a certain branding or whatever, being able to show how you partner back and forth with your content team to create whatever end product that you're trying to create. I would say too, grab some of those books just to really get familiar, because there's that, I draw great stick figures and that's kind of it. I know what I like visually, but I'm not a visual designer at all. I'm a word person. I mean, like I said, ask how difficult it was for me to pare down the words on these slides that I just showed you. It was tough, but working together with both disciplines is how you kind of meet in the middle. And as you have more experience, if you're in a company where you have content people, even if they don't call themselves content strategists, sit with them, learn their challenges, right? And figure out how design and content can come together to solve problems. And then start to demonstrate that in your portfolio or whatever. Hope that answered your question.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Anybody else? I see one way in the back. Way back there, okay.
This is such a great presentation, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I was curious, are you seeing more and more, you're a consultant, but are you seeing more and more of this content creation outsourced to freelancers, and how are you able to kind of keep that consistency of voice and whatnot over time?
It's interesting. As a content strategy consultant, a lot of companies know that they need content strategy, but they're kind of afraid to make the leap to hire folks in-house. We do have, at Anthem, we have full-time employees, FTEs, that are content strategists. But as new sites and projects and migrations and all that stuff come along, it's like, well, we have 2 people on staff and we need 10. So, hi, thank you. I think too, when I started, I worked on the Washington Gas project. I was working at an advertising agency that brought me in for one project. It was LA Care, actually. And they knew that they needed someone to come in and help with the site redesign and to make it, wayfinding and all the good things. They ended up hiring me full-time because they had more clients that were like, we want some of that content strategy stuff, how do we get it? And is she gonna do our social media? I was like, no, we have another team for that. But the thing I had to do was I actually had to educate people internally, like through lunch and learns and office hours and all that stuff. It's like, that's not content strategy, this is content strategy. And it's different from place to place, right? But when I remember one of my colleagues at the advertising agency was like, what exactly do you do? Like, what do you do? It's like, don't make it sound like that. So then I saw the need, and I was like, well, let me educate my colleagues so they understand what it is that I do and how I'm differentiated from the people on the social media team, right? And that kind of thing. So it's really about education. It's about still, I feel like we're not in the infancy stage anymore with content strategy, but if you look at content strategy job descriptions for companies like Facebook, their content strategists are UI UX writers. They don't do necessarily what I do. They can, and I can write, I can do either, but I love sitting with UX and solving problems. That's my thing. And finding patterns and, yeah, it's like, going through content and Well, the last content of it I did make me cry, but literally made me cry because I had to compare PDFs between two sites, and there were 3,100 of them, and I am not exaggerating. It was painful, but it's a highly regulated space, so we had to do it. So, I mean, it's really about internal education and making an attempt to not cross-train so much. Like I don't do wires or anything like that either, but I do try to educate myself on each part of the, I'll just say the product development process, for lack of a better term. I try to educate myself on each part of the process to see where I can be useful, right? And in doing so, I'm educating my colleagues about what it is that I do and vice versa.
Thank you.
You're welcome.